Hello, I'm Kevin Tame. Welcome to the Hacktivist. Today I'm going to be talking about the CI Moons deck and the deck matchups that it faces. So this is my current record as of this last week or two playing the CI Moons. So 21-6. And those matches, the 6 losses I'll talk about individually and what made them tough and how to kind of combat them. But I want to just talk here quickly about the different pieces, important pieces in this deck. So Clones Are Not People is one that I want to call out as really important because you only run 2-pointers in this deck. So you're going to have to either score 4 times or score with Clones Are Not People. It's ideal to be able to only score 3 times and make your opponent steal 4 agendas. So this is a really important card. Paywall implementation and targeted marketing, they are really important for clearing out Hacktivist meeting. Targeted marketing is also just really good if they're not playing Hacktivist against shapers, if you want to say like SMC or Magnum Opus, or any of their economy. It's a really good card to just to say like, hey, in order for you to get your economy going, you're going to give me 10 credits, which is great. The one thing I want to note here about Clones Are Not People is you don't want to really use it unless you have to clear Hacktivists, because you want to save it for that moment to be able to score it. Because I found sometimes I used it too early, and then what would happen is my opponent would then just play another current to clear it. This is the same with Employee Strike, right? Like, it's really hard. Sometimes it's just better to pitch down cards than to pitch this. So the main core of this deck is Estelle Moon, and what you're doing is just spamming out assets. You're going to use Lakshmi Smart Fabrics to score most of the time, unless they're on Film Critic, and then you're going to kind of lean on your Sandberg and try and score behind a remote. The main things that you want to protect in this deck are your Estelle Moon, your Lakshmi Smart Fabrics, and your Sandberg. Everything else, and your Jeeves as well. And it all kind of depends on what they're focusing on. So, for the most part, your primary thing to protect is Estelle Moon, and just put a cheap piece of ice, an Enigma or a Vanilla, and just try and get as many counters on her as you can. The Ice Suite is pretty good in this. Architect is your friend. If you can get him to fire, it is great. Usually can do it with 2 counters on. Get 2 counters on Moon. Ashigaru is kind of the mid to late game ice, where you are locking out HQ typically or a remote server, and Loki is there just to be able to copy Ashigaru. This is the deck that I had been playing for a long time, but I've actually made some changes recently. I've added the calibration testing, and I got rid of the cyber decks because I found that, like, if they were on Clot Lock, I couldn't get through Clot anyways. It was because there's so much SATCons, are so popular, that Cyberdex actually it didn't help me hardly ever at all. So one of the changes I made is I took out Ashigaru, went down to 1 to be able to have enough influence for calibration testing. And then what I did is I got rid of Loki as well, and I went for 3 Vanilla and 2 Enigma and 3 Architect and 1 Ashigaru. So that is the major change here. I found that Loki was kind of expensive to res early, and Ashigaru is obviously really expensive to res, and I didn't want to see them. And when I had 2 Ashigaru and 1 Loki, I saw it too early, and I wasn't able to, and I was using it in ways like as like a gear check ice, just putting it out there, and I could never res. And so I felt like it just wasn't as useful for me. Enigma and Vanilla are some of the best ice in the game for forcing the runner to check and punishing them a little bit, specifically with Enigma. So I actually think this is a better build. Calibration testing is just another thing to install and helps you fast advance out when you need it. So really, I was almost tempted to put 2 in and maybe ditch the Ashigaru, but I'm not sold yet on that play. So one of the major decks that you have to deal with is Comrade's Vow, or any kind of combination of Vow. What they do that is really difficult is they have Film Critic and Mining Accident and Hacktivist. These are some of your arch nemesis, if you will. Mining Accident early can really cripple your economy, but I believe you have to pay it every time. If a mining accident fires, you have to pay the 5 because giving them the bad pub, they're just going to be able to control your board and you're not going to be able to get an economic advantage. Hacktivists, you have your currents to help clear out. Sometimes just scoring is the answer to deal with hacktivists. And sometimes just rezzing things that you need is another way to deal with hacktivists. Film Critic, be aware of this. I got fooled on one match where I went out with the Lakshmi play. I should have foresaw it, and then they came out with a Film Critic and was able to get my I think it was a Vitruvius or something like that. Just be aware that it's there, but I think it's smart to rush it out anyways with Lakshmi and force them to have the Film Critic because they might not have it in hand and you're going to probably be able to get an agenda scored. Rebirth is another important one in that what they will do is you will spread your ice out pretty thin because you only have 9. You'll start covering remotes and then your centrals, and then they'll rebirth into Omar and come in through the back door, and then they have clear access to HQ, which can be a problem. Turning wheel and indexing, I think they're pretty self-explanatory. If they can index spam you, it's obviously going to be a pain. Just lock up R&D or draw fast enough to get it all into HQ where that's not as big of a deal. Max, I think, is actually is I don't know if it's tougher, but one of the big problems here is they typically run Ma, and they're just a lot faster. So they'll get hacktivists out, they'll get Ma out, they'll get the mining accidents. There's a few versions of Max. I think the ones that have Ma and hacktivist and mining accident and just kind of like good stuff Max is going to be your biggest challenge. And even Opus Max but Opus is sometimes a little slow, but they can click up and trash your stuff. So it's a difficult match. Tag Me Anarch. The Tag Me Anarch decks, this is actually a really good matchup for you, and I think they're easy to deal with. They're not fast enough to deal with CI Moons, and they're not going to be able to deal with your remotes. So you're going to get an economic advantage quickly. You're going to be able to get a Sandberg out, and you're going to be able to protect your centrals, specifically R&D, so they're not going to be able to do that big dig. Now, I think in the future, they're going to be playing by any means, which allows them to trash any card they access in a given turn. So I think that might be a problem for CI Moons. I haven't played any decks against that, so that's just something to be aware of. The Wilfy Haley, or Laguna Lock Haley, I think is what it's called. This is a pretty easy match, I actually think, because you're able to go faster. They are not able to get... they might clot lock you, and the key here is just, I think, keep purging whenever they have Tapworm down. They're going to be giving you money, which fuels your Sandberg, which is great. They might hit you with an information sifting if they can get it off. But a lot of times you're going to just have so much more money than them because of the Peace in Our Times and you purging their stuff every time you get it. And your favorite card is Jeeves because you purge and then you get an extra click with Jeeves. So you want to continue to just keep purging and clicking with Jeeves. So do not let them keep Tapworm, because if you do, then it's going to be problematic. Smoke is another one where I think you're just faster than she is. And you might get R&D locked with Equivocation and Maker's Eye kind of stuff. But there's a few flavors. I've seen Smoke with Levy. I've seen it with Film Critic. You have to be careful, obviously, with the Film Critic. But they're not on Clot Lock, typically. So you can fast advance outs a lot of times. Some of the Smoke decks run Gauntlet and some of them run Ma. If you see Ma, this is obviously a little bit more problematic. However, it's still a big tempo hit for them to install, so I think you can take advantage of that and score out pretty quick. Another thing that they do, just like the Haley decks, is they have Peace in Our Time and they use Tapworm with Satcons. So every time you see a Tapworm go down, just purge and get rid of that thing. It's worth it because you don't want them to, you're going to get so much money that you don't want them to have all that money as well. Apoc Steve is another one that I faced and saw a little bit out. Any Apocalypse deck is kind of a pain. You just have to realize that that's what they're doing. So if you see something like, Abigail, and like, it's kind of hard to tell that an Apocalypse is coming. But I think you can just kind of assume that they might have that in this deck, because I haven't seen any other decks that are like as strong. And basically what they do here is they install Abigail and Damara and stuff that they can trash, like Fairy and stuff like that. And then they come in and they hit your centrals, and then they Apocalypse you, and then they've already lost their breakers, and they use Aesop's Pawn Shop or Independent Thinking to be able to trash the remaining pieces of their cards. So I think it's a pretty easy match as long as you don't overextend yourself. When they do their run, what I personally like to do is I like to put Architect on my centrals, specifically HQ and R&D, because if they Apocalypse you, that card doesn't get trashed and they'll remain there. And that's a really good card on centrals. You have to be aware of Sneak Door Beta, though. That's one that these criminal decks are playing a lot of, and they will come in and sneak things out that way. Pretty straightforward. Just kind of do your game plan, but don't overextend yourself. So when you do your successful field test play, don't install everything. Keep stuff in hand. Gang Signs Leela. This is actually, I thought Max and Val might have been the hardest matches, but this is actually your hardest match. Because what they do is they don't run at all. And they sit back and allow you to score and then pop things out of the way. And you don't have a lot of ice. So even if you double ice, it's a problem, because they won't go in and run it. And then they'll access with Gang Signs and HQ interface, and they will hit another agenda, and then they will bounce more ice away. It kind of feels like they cheese themselves into wins, but with Maw and Gang Signs, they're getting these accesses to where most of your agendas are, and they're going to hit them. I only played 2 in the games, and I lost both of them, and I lost both of them pretty they handled my board pretty good. And I'm trying to figure out how to win this match. I think leaning on Lakshmi is probably the answer. So you really want to protect that. Get a lot of credits to protect Lakshmi and Sandberg. And at that point, what you can do is you can use Lakshmi to be able to protect your agendas. Difficult match. I want to try it again to see if I am able to beat it. But I was not able to beat both of the matches that I faced. Well, that concludes this deck matchups. There's lots of other decks out there, but I think some of those are some of the key ones. I faced a Los, which was an APOC Los. I faced other Haley builds. I faced lots of variations of types of decks, and I handled them pretty successfully. But those ones that I mentioned here are the ones that I think are the most difficult. And the 6 losses that I had were 2 losses to Val, 2 losses to Max, and 2 losses to Leela. And I think it all came, in those matches, I had some plays that I made mistakes, specifically on the Max and Val matchup. And the Leela one, I just haven't figured out how to win. But I think if you can win that match, like, you should be pretty proud of yourself, because it's a tough one. Well, thanks for watching this. And if you have any questions or comments about CI Moons, let me know, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.